I'm Diana Theisinger with STLI, and it is my pleasure to moderate a panel of distinguished educators here at William & Mary today, and this really fun event that's already so unique. So with me today, I have Josh Ehrlich, who's been a physics professor at William & Mary since 2005. His research is focused on elementary particle physics and gravity. He's also currently director of the Center for Liberal Arts and performs as a magician in his spare time. Yeah, fun fact. Yep. Nicole Brown is a PhD candidate in American Studies at William & Mary. She worked previously at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation and the Bray School, and recently co-edited a book entitled The Williamsburg Bray School, 1760 to 1774, A History Through Records, Reflections, and Rediscovery. Bev Scher is currently a teaching professor in the chemistry department. Bev has been teaching at William & Mary since spring of 1992. That was appropriate. Okay. And then last but not least, Caitlin McGill is an associate teaching professor of English at William & Mary. Her writing has been published in McSweeney's and Vox, and she's won numerous awards and accolades for her writing. These wonderful humans have agreed to share with us about some of their watershed moments in teaching, some of those significant times when they had kind of a light bulb, an aha, something that changed the course of their teaching, or that just made them, you know, when they reflect back into who they are today as instructors. So I'm going to prompt them to share some of those moments, and then at the end I will try my best to offer some synthesis and wrap things up, and maybe invite them and our audience here to find some themes that tie their experiences together. Bev, I'm going to pick on you first.
Well, goody.
Okay, you shared a watershed moment about working with K through 8 teachers and moving from the guide on the side, or moving from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side, I should say.
Right.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So when we came to Williamsburg, my husband had a tenure-track job in physics. He works with Josh, actually. And I had 2 very small kids, one of whom had taught himself to read at 22 months. And this was, you know, challenging. And I discovered that we had a Center for Gifted Education in the School of Ed, and went for help. And met Joyce Van Tassel-Baska, who is a world expert on curriculum development and also on gifted ed. And I walked away with a job. So they had just gotten a big grant to do science curriculum development for K through 8. And they needed a science consultant. So I knew science. I had gotten a PhD in biology at Caltech and had done a postdoc at Stanford. And I had actually taught at Caltech as a TA. But science grad students typically don't get any instruction on how to teach or how to do curriculum. So it was all learn by doing. And I'd done it for 5 years, and it served me well when I taught immunology here in '92. But it was really fascinating to work with teachers who were in the classroom every day, working with students that were younger than the group that I had taught. Such experience, such wisdom from those K through 8 teachers. They were amazing. And then working for Joyce was amazing. Joyce is one of these mentors who says, oh, you know, you've never jumped at all, but you're going to jump 10 feet tomorrow. And, you know, she's sure you can do it, and so you do it. And that's actually something that served me well working with students, because if you are confident that they can do this thing, it helps them do it. But I think the most useful thing was doing problem-based learning. So these were PBL units. It had never been done at K through 8 before. It came out of the medical schools. And in PBL, you give students an ill-structured, real-world problem, like, oh my gosh, we have an epidemic. Okay, what are we going to do? And the role of the teacher is to stand back and guide the problem solving, but really just let the students, you know, do it sort of methodically. And I thought, that's different. You know, I've only done lecture. And I was really impressed by the fact that it worked, okay, and that students actually seemed to get more out of it than lecture. So fast forward to 1996. I had discovered this amazing book, Laurie Garrett's book, The Coming Plague. And it's about that thick and has really, small type, but it was just so cool. And I bored everybody out of their minds telling them about this thing. My students, my kid's preschool teacher, people like that, random people in the grocery store. And my husband said, that would make a really good freshman seminar. They're looking for people to teach those. And I thought, oh yeah, it probably would. But it was sort of terrifying because I had always taught lecture. And I was worried about getting content across, because as a lecturer, you have control. And so I was thinking, okay, this is discussion intensive. What am I going to do? What happens if they don't talk? Right? That was worrisome. And what I realized after teaching it the first time was that if you have a really good discussable book and you back off and you let themes emerge organically, the students actually get a lot more out of it. So I was being the guide on the side and not the sage on the stage. And it was just much richer and more fun than lecture ever had been. So that's my watershed moment.
That was great. Have you ever gone back to lecture, or has it just been ever since then?
I haven't taught a lecture class since 1997, and it's fine with me. So I've taught 150s, 100s, and even a 400.
Wonderful. Nicole, I'm going to come to you next. So you shared with me beforehand a watershed moment about teaching students how to read cursive so that they could interpret primary source materials.
Yes. So I will say I am very new to teaching in maybe a traditional format. So I'm TAing the first course I've ever TA'd for this semester, which is Rethinking America. It's been really fascinating and wonderful. And also thank you to STLI, because I was, as a graduate student, blessed with Breyer's teaching this summer in particular on teaching from scratch, which has been really helpful in me not only building my work moving forward, but also reflecting on past moments and why they worked when I couldn't figure out why they had worked, if that makes sense. So in a non-traditional capacity, I've spent over a decade working at museums in Virginia predominantly, where people will come to you and say, could you briefly and succinctly explain to me the history of women, and also where is the bathroom, usually in the same sentence, which is a real crash course into teaching.
Yeah.
But it was very different when I began working with undergraduate students at William & Mary, who are coming in maybe with a very concentrated type of background. They're very driven. I was an undergraduate student at William & Mary, so they're sometimes very anxious, and I was predominantly working with freshmen and sophomores. And this was while I was the lab assistant at the William & Mary Bray School Lab. And so I had a student, her name is Skylar. She is wonderful. She still goes to school here. And she approached me as a freshman and approached the lab and said, I'm really passionate about history, and I really, really love studying history, and I really want to work at the lab as a student thought partner. And so what I would do with each student is I would meet with them after getting sort of an informal interview from them virtually, and then sort of develop an individualized development plan for what the soft and hard skill sets were that I wanted them to grow, but also get a sense of what project they might fit on. And we ran into a challenge because Skylar said, I'm really passionate about documents and primary sources, and I want to study those. I said, fantastic, do you have any transcription experience? So transcription being transcribing original documents. And she said, well, not really, because I have never been taught to read cursive. And I think what was really amazing about this moment is that it led to a very candid conversation between Skylar and myself, where I realized if we were scaffolding on prior knowledge, right? She's very passionate about these sources. She's very passionate about the history. She has experience in analysis, but she may not have the technical skill that she requires to do something that she wants to do as a career. So the workaround, what we sort of came up with after listening to her and talking with people like Debbie Cornell at the library, thank goodness for Debbie Cornell, is that I started using a software system called Transcribus, which you can take a primary source and you input it into the system, and it will throw out a transcription for you. Spoiler alert, the transcriptions are never right. They're not. But that's not really the point. The point is that you would end up with a document where you could click on each line and it would zoom in on the incorrect transcription. And so that gave the student just enough focus to focus in on one line at a time, rather than a whole page of handwriting they might not be able to read. And it turned out that Skylar was actually one of our best transcribers. And I think that has to do with the fact that when you listen to students about what they're passionate about, the onus was on me to come up with a solution. I don't need to go to a 19-year-old and be like, well, I guess you better learn how to transcribe real fast. You know, that's not helpful to her. You can have some sort of incredible outcomes. And to this last point, I will say, that also applies when you're doing community work. So a great deal of the book that I worked on most recently, half of the essays in the body of the book were written by descendants of students from the Bray School, so descendants of those scholars. And prior to the book even being written, we were working on these transcriptions, and the students were working on them. I was so proud of them, and I brought them the finalized transcriptions to one of the descendant community members who was a collaborator, and I said, what do you think? And she went, well, this is great. I'm really excited about it. I've been asking for this transparency. But I learn by listening. So how are you going to make these accessible to me? And initially, what made me laugh about this is I'm also an auditory processor, and I thought, isn't it funny that another auditory processor had to come to me and say that for me to realize there was a learning gap here? But I ended up using my experience in voiceover training as a theater major, as an undergraduate at William & Mary, to train students on not only how to do voiceovers in our library, but by extension that then allowed us to turn the documents into something that many of the descendants said afterwards, who I interacted with, this is more helpful to us. This is what we were asking for. So I think when you kind of engage with students in that way, it leads to you growing as a person in ways you might not have anticipated. And certainly that is the case for me.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right, Josh, you shared, this is appropriate for somebody who's a magician in his spare time. You shared a watershed moment about kind of your evolution from starting out pretending that people could see your calculations on a waxy chalkboard to where more recently you were climbing into a 6-foot balloon to see how long a person can breathe within the balloon. And by a person, I think that we mean you. Yeah, okay. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, that's a little bit longer story. Yeah, I was thinking about watershed moments in my career that caused me to change direction in the ways that I teach. And I noticed that the few examples I came up with were all embarrassing, really embarrassing stories, ways that I failed dramatically. So one of those, I had been at William & Mary for 6 years. Rite of passage for physics professors is we need to teach general physics. So the first time I taught Physics 101, general physics, this rite of passage, I was also a lucky professor who was the first to teach in the newly renovated, beautiful, small hall when was it? It was 2011. First person in the largest lecture room in the building, small 110. I thought I did my homework. I picked a blackboard on the side. By the way, I'm old-fashioned. I wanted to give a good old-fashioned course, chalk and chalkboard, that's my way. I'm never happier than when I have a piece of chalk and a chalkboard with me. So that was my objective, that was my plan. I thought I'd done my homework. I went to the chalkboard on the side before, a few days before class started, I would write. I went to the back of the room. Can you see it? Can you hear me? It seemed like everything was fine. So it turned out that the 3 layered blackboards that you could pull one on top of the other at the center of the room were brand new. Not the one I was messing with, I was experimenting with. They were brand new. They were covered in a waxy coating, and I brought nothing with me except a piece of chalk. So I get to class, first day of class, I say, welcome class. We introduce ourselves. I always have a few jokes at the beginning of the first class. And I go to start writing, and it was invisible. And I thought, what am I going to do? I have a document camera there. I have no paper or pens. I have a computer. I don't have anything to show them. So I thought, what am I going to do? I'm going to pretend they could see what I'm writing. And I did that. So I went through class. I later found out that I don't have a great teaching voice. I don't have that voice that carries. So I thought students were able to hear me, except that in the back of that room, it's on the first floor, right by the entrance to small hall. And as students are entering and exiting, there's all sorts of background noise. So the students couldn't hear me. They couldn't see what I was writing. It was a miserable start to a really difficult semester. So what did that force me to do? I had to learn how to use modern technology in the classroom, and I did, and it gave me all sorts of wonderful opportunities. The document camera gave me ways of organizing the presentation I hadn't thought about before. Even better, the computer, using it in the room. After all, the screen was down anyway. Might as well use the computer. Able to show the Space Shuttle Atlantis taking off as an example of fluid dynamics, and there's wonderful moments in there that I won't take up time with right now, but you see the shock wave because conditions were just right as it reaches maximum pressure and goes past the speed of sound. Wonderful example. When we were talking about centripetal motion, I found video from India, the sphere of death. The sphere of death. These people on motorcycles climb into a sphere and they go around vertically, sideways, every which way. Maybe 5 of them were inside this big sphere of death, riding around the walls of this cage, a spherical cage, as an example of spherical motion. And there was a lesson there. We got to calculate how fast do they have to be moving at the top so it doesn't actually become its namesake, a sphere of death. Well, okay, so that semester didn't go so well. Second time I teach the class, I thought to myself, well, what else didn't go well? This is a broad survey. This is why this is a rite of passage. This course is a broad survey, and it's going quickly. You get to one topic and you say, angular momentum, the reason this is so exciting and so important for your life is, okay, the next topic is, and you don't get to show the students everything if you go, if you follow the textbook and you just work through line by line. The students rather complain, the professor just shows us proofs. So what do you mean proofs? That's not language that I use in my classes, but they was showing us proofs. They didn't want to see that. So second round, I thought, what can I do? And this was a dramatic shift in the way I teach, and I've carried this with me. I thought, physics is not always relatable to people. Believe it or not, physics is not always relatable to people. But why? Physics is everywhere. Make it relatable. So I made every class, I dreamt up some demonstration that would either be fun, entertaining, relatable to them. I demonstrated Newton's laws by soldering together a Tesla coil and using sparks in a way that illustrated Newton's laws. Made music with propane in a perforated tube, lit on fire, playing music through it. You see the flames dance. If you play a tone of the right frequency, it makes a nice, beautiful waveform in the flames, and that allows you to calculate the speed of sound in propane. We were able to do that. That was kind of fun. All sorts of things. Some of them were more human and relatable. Some of them were just examples like that were just to pique interest. So that was a lot of fun. So I would say, watershed moment. Yeah, try to make class fun. You mentioned one example. I guess I should elaborate. When we were talking about fluids, you can ask a question. As I'm breathing, I breathe some amount of air with each breath, and when I exhale, there's less oxygen in that exhaled breath than in the breath that I inhaled. So if I was in a big balloon, there are all sorts of things that you can calculate, but one of them, which is pretty straightforward, is how long can I survive in there while breathing inside a big 6-foot balloon? And I should have brought it. I had a book, How to Climb into a 6-Foot Balloon. It's the title of a book. So I figured it out. I blew up a giant balloon with actually, I think I used a leaf blower, and I climbed in. Not previously used leaf blower. It was clean. Anyway, so I climbed in and imagine.
Yes, that was the important detail that we were all
that's
stuck
right, that's
on.
right.
Yeah.
Imagine this physics professor in this giant bubble, basically, talking with a microphone through this bubble, bouncing up and down. It was a lot of fun. And we did the experiment, and I survived. So, the calculation, well, we had a bound anyway. One last thing. So I took this with me in a subsequent class. Again, one of the demonstrations, I was thinking since we're in a museum, I would show you a piece of art. So we were learning about polarization in this class, polarization of light. And so light is electric and magnetic fields oscillating different ways as they come to you. That sounds boring, but different colors correspond to different wavelengths. So it turns out that the way that the light is polarized, going this way or that way, can change if that light passes through certain materials, like cellophane, for example. So I thought to myself, hey, you can use this to make art, because the way the light rotates is different for different colors, for different wavelengths. So I tried to actually use this, I'll show you how in a moment, to make a piece of art representing what did I do? I did the Crimdale Bridge. It was horrible. I'm not going to show you that. It didn't come out well. But then I thought to myself, somebody has to do this as a profession. And I went online and I found there are 2 people I could identify who do this. One of them actually sold some of her work, Austin Camaro, who unfortunately died to cancer a few years ago. But she sold some of her work online, and her family keeps it going. So I brought one piece of this. And I'd like to just show you, because showing this to the class I thought was fantastic. Now, yeah, thank you. So, hello. So this actually works a lot better with the light source behind me. So what this is a sheet of polarizing paper, like your sunglasses, but over certain areas. So there's a sheet of a polarizing lens basically on one side, a little bit in certain areas, and you see color. But the remarkable thing here is, and we'll see if you can actually see this. Thank you. We'll see if you can actually see this. Oh, is that what you were doing?
It was on.
Okay, there you go. Tell me if you can see that. Isn't that really neat? Thank you, Pablo, also.
That's exceptional.
Okay. What a way to learn about polarization of light. And of course, there's math to go with it. And I'll show you that after the show. Thanks, Diana.
That's the kind of support you can expect when you collaborate with STLI.
Thank you. That was my other watershed moment. I forgot to mention learning about STLI and taking advantage of them. Yes. So STLI is amazing in everything they do. Thumbs up.
Yeah. We'll take it. Thank you. All right, Caitlin, you shared a watershed moment about, and this speaks to my heart as a former English teacher, approaching teaching like you approach the writing process and moving students out of the cone of silence. Will you tell us more about that?
Yeah. Thank you all for everything you shared. I'm feeling inspired and thinking a lot about the connections and the many things I don't know that I'm being taught for the first time. But yeah, those 2 pieces are connected, but I'll speak about them individually, less anecdotally and more generally, but definitely both of those things are very important to how I teach now and were crucial turning points for me when I was earlier in my teaching. I've been teaching for a little over 10 years, and I was very nervous about many things, as many of us are when we begin teaching, and one of them was, one, getting it right, which when I say that out loud now doesn't even quite make sense, but a lot of that had to do with, for me, control and feeling like I am definitely helping these people learn. And when I realized that when I moved aside and let them speak more, that they would learn more, that took a lot of pressure off and helped them succeed more. So that's a general response, I think, to bringing the students to the center of the room. First, I think about teaching now as essaying, and some of you may know the word essay as a verb. I believe, linguists, please correct me, means to try, to attempt. I think research similarly has some roots in circling, right? So we think about essaying as a sort of testing an idea, being obsessed with one thing and circling it and coming at it from different angles, and being open to surprise. And in fact, inviting the surprise is usually where the most meaning comes from. So when I realized that as I'm teaching a creative nonfiction workshop where the students are sharing their creative nonfiction work and we're talking about the writing process, that the classroom could do that too and would in fact thrive on that, that was really freeing, and in fact felt, once I started doing it, very, very instinctual and natural. I I used to, and still sometimes very low stakes dance, and I always really loved improvisational dance as well, with a little bit of structure. So what that looks like practically is perhaps we're coming in to talk about a few texts that we've read, and I may have a few particular points that I feel are important or passages that I want to point to, but really being loose with that structure, knowing that it's there if I need to fall back on it, if it seems like they need me more, but really inviting where they want to go, letting departures happen and digressions and surprises, and that's usually where the most exciting stuff happens for us. And that's, again, true for me on the page as a writer. I think often for the writers, the younger writers or emerging writers in the room. And again, that kind of, it's like a relinquishing of control, which as human beings, oftentimes we want, but usually when we can let go, something beautiful can happen. You mentioned the cone of silence also. So some of you may know a little bit about, or a lot about, creative writing workshops. So decades ago when they began, and for many years after, and until very recently, the general approach was to, or the common approach was for the writer whose work was being discussed that day, that they would not speak during the discussion, that we would sort of, there's different reasons for this. One of them was to sort of simulate what it might be like when you pick up a piece of published work in a bookstore or library, right? The writer's not there to chime in. So trying to say, what would this piece read like for someone without the writer, explaining why they did what they did, which of course has some merits. But what we've discovered in the last several years is that letting the writer in on the conversation, not so that they can defend their work or to take away from hearing what the reading experience is for readers, lets them both talk through their process and learn more about why they made the choices they made, and also what kind of changes or revisions or discoveries might come in the future. That's a huge help. And then it also helps for writers who have especially been historically silenced or marginalized to get to chime in and say, hey, I'd rather not talk about that topic right now, or my imagined ideal reader would already know all of that, so we don't have to spend 45 minutes talking about what that cultural ritual is, right? So again, I feel like both of those, teaching as essaying and rejecting the cone of silence, unsilencing the workshop, as the writer Beth Nguyen says, really help the students be the center, help the instructor be a part of the meaning making, and also less center stage. And that's been a really, really important shift for me.
Thank you so much. First, I just want to acknowledge that the through line with all of you, and that I hear in so many conversations with instructors at William & Mary, is just a dedication to our students and to being student-centered. So I'm actually going to pause and embarrass you and ask everyone to clap for the student-centered focus that we heard just now, and all of you. So Caitlin, you mentioned this, but I was hearing it kind of evolve as each of you shared your stories of your moments. Really, so much of your watershed moments, each of you, was about relinquishing control over the classroom and about being willing to pivot, being willing to provide supports that you didn't initially intend to provide, going a little bit off script, and maybe taking a risk, but a calculated risk that you knew would benefit and support your students. I want to kind of reflect that back to you and ask, as you were listening and maybe even as you were retelling your moments, what came up for you about some of the common threads on the panel?
One of the things, and this is just why I'm so appreciative to be on this panel with the four of you, is how important passion is to a student's experience, right? If you are not passionate about, I really want to take your physics class now, but thank you, I might. But if you are passionate about what you are bringing to the table, I think that comes through. And for me, as a graduate student who just finished taking all her graduate courses, that was also very true on the graduate level as well. So I feel like it's just very humbling to be around alongside four people who are clearly so passionate about what they do, and I think that makes you sometimes more willing to be flexible and pivot because you want everyone to be as passionate about the subject as you are.
I also want to take that physics class, and I don't think I would have ever said that before, so you are very good at this. I just want to, I suppose, re-emphasize I had that observation as I articulated about the control element, and I think so much of that really comes from wanting to do a good job, right? And so, yeah, it's just really, I suppose, paradoxical and then really freeing to see how it can work when we step aside in some ways. And I love the idea of the calculated risk. That feels like the right phrase.
So I wanted to address the fear of failure side of it. You know, Josh told that wonderful story about so many ways to fail. And I think the attitude that you take when that happens really helps the students. A lot of our students are very anxious and perfectionistic, and if they can see us say, oh, that didn't work, let's try something else, that helps them.
If I could just piggyback on that, yeah, I absolutely agree. I always think students should be given the opportunity to fail. That's how students are the most creative. You let them try things that don't work. And I feel actually, maybe a little off topic, but we focus so much on students passing, getting the A, getting the grade, being able to make room for students to fail, and I certainly practice what I preach. I fail in the classroom all the time, and they see that, that's for sure.
Yeah, if it's okay, that reminds me, one thing that was really important to my teaching over the years and to being a human being is just being happy to say, I don't know. And to say, like, you may know, and I'd love to learn from you, and let's figure it out together. What research can we do? So, yeah, I think a lot of that, yeah, again, kind of frees up the pressure we feel. And you said, someone said students are anxious. I'm anxious. I don't know about you all. So I think a large part of this decentering of ourselves also has to do with taking some pressure off in a way that benefits all of us, even though we're doing a lot of calculation in that taking the pressure off, if that makes sense.
Thank you all so much for your stories and for your candor in sharing them with this room full of rapt audience members. I think we might be out of time, unfortunately, yeah. This guy's pulling me off stage. All right.